Alright, I'm going to attempt to show you guys how the movement of the moon and the earth change the tides on Earth. So we're going to say that this little triangle is U, and normally there would just be water all around the Earth, but the moon has a gravitational pull, and so it's going to pull it towards itself. It also pulls Earth, and it creates a bulge on either side of the Earth. The sun also pulls, has gravity, and so it will pull a little bit more. And so when we have the moon either in the new moon or the full moon position, it's going to pull it extra far to create really high tides and really low tides. And we call this big difference the spring tide. So I'll show you how this works because the moon orbits slower than the Earth rotates. So we're going to say this is U, and when you are here and if you were at the beach, you'd have really high tides. Okay, in this same day, we're going to show if you rotate, as you're rotating, what's happening, the water's going down, and about 6 hours after we started, you would have a low tide. And you will just keep moving, you will rotate, because this is again the same day, so about 6 hours later, you're back to having a really high tide. And then continuing all the way down, now you have a really low tide. Alright, so this would happen. You would just keep moving, so you'd have really high tides, really low tides, but the moon is also going to be moving. So the moon starts revolving around, and when the moon gets to this point, it's going to continue to pull the oceans toward it. So when the moon is either in the first quarter position or the third quarter position, it's going to pull the oceans toward it, but remember the sun, that's not moving, will also pull it. And so what we have is less of a big difference between the tides. And so we call this neap tide. Okay, and so we're going to look at a day with a neap tide. And so the moon actually, even though it's smaller than the sun, it's closer to us, and so it's going to pull on our oceans just a little more. So you will still see this right here would be a low tide, right? And you're at the beach, and as time goes on, a few hours later in the day, you're at a high tide, but this high tide is not nearly as high as it was during the spring tide because we're in neap tide. So the day is going to continue, and now you're over here, and we have another low tide, but again, it's not nearly as low as it was during the spring tide. And you just continue moving throughout the day. You have a high tide again, and then later, so I guess this would be midday, you'd have a low tide, and then back facing the moon, you have another high tide. Alright, so just to review, when the moon is either a new moon position, so it's going to really pull, we have spring tide, really high highs and really low lows. So if the moon is a new moon or full moon, we're going to have an exaggerated pull, right? Because the two, the sun and the moon, they have lots of gravity pulling them apart. But then, when the moon is in the first quarter or the third quarter position, we have neap tides. So again, the third quarter or the first quarter, we have neap tides where there's not as much of a difference between the high and the low tides because these two bodies are perpendicular to each other. And so the moon's pulling this way and the sun's pulling this way, and so you have more of even tides throughout the day.